Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for joining me. At a time when the President of the United States is waging an unrelentless war against democracy, when we are experiencing the worst public health crisis in 100 years, when climate change is threatening the planet with massive destruction, and when systemic racism continues to rear its ugly and murderous hand, we cannot forget another catastrophic reality, and that is that the working class of America is experiencing more economic devastation today than at any time since the Great Depression of the 1930s. That is a reality that we cannot push aside. As a result of the pandemic, tens of millions of workers have lost their jobs, their incomes, and their health insurance. Today, hunger is at its highest level in decades. Over 500,000 Americans are now homeless as we speak, and 30 million more face eviction because they don't have the income to pay their rent. And in the midst of this murderous pandemic, if you can believe it, more than 90 million of our people are uninsured or underinsured and cannot afford to go to a doctor when they get sick. While the official unemployment rate is now 6.9%, the truth is that 1 out of every 4 U.S. workers in October was either unemployed or was earning a starvation income of less than $20,000 a year, and nobody can live on that. And as bad as the economy has been in general, it has been far worse for African American and Latino workers. During the pandemic, nearly 60% of Latino families and 55% of African American families have either experienced a job loss or a pay cut. Meanwhile, and this is an important point you're not going to hear in too many places. Meanwhile, as millions live in fear and economic desperation, the pandemic has not been financially unkind to all. In fact, some of the very richest people in our country are becoming much richer as we now witness a massive increase in income and wealth inequality. Incredibly, over the last 8 months, 650 billionaires have seen their wealth go up by over $1 trillion. But let us be clear, and this is an important point to make. Growing income and wealth inequality and the decline of the working class in our country is not a new phenomenon attributable to the pandemic. It is an economic trend that has been going on for a very, very long time. Despite an explosion in technology and a huge increase in worker productivity, the average American worker today is making $30 a week less than he or she did 47 years ago after adjusting for inflation. In other words, while the cost of housing and childcare and health care and prescription drugs and other basic living expenses have been soaring, wages have stagnated. Further, since 1990, not just during this pandemic, but since 1990, there's been a massive transfer of wealth from the bottom of the economy way up to the top. While the top 1% have seen their wealth go up by $22 trillion, top 1% wealth increased by $22 trillion, the bottom 50% of Americans have seen their wealth go down by $776 billion. So I don't mean to bore you with a whole lot of numbers here, but the people on top doing phenomenally well, bottom half of America seeing a decline in their wealth. And this is also incredible. And that is that if income inequality had remained the same as it was in 1975, guess what? The average worker in America would be making $42,000 more today. $42,000 more today. These are unprecedented times, and Congress and the Biden administration must respond in an unprecedented way. If we are going to restore faith in government to the millions of Americans who are living in deprivation and despair, we must act boldly. If we're going to provide hope to those who have given up on democracy and are looking to authoritarianism for their future, we must act boldly. As a U.S. Senator from Vermont, I'm going to do everything I can to fight for the strongest pro-worker agenda possible. And here are some, underline some, of the proposals that should be addressed within the first 100 days of the Biden administration, which would not only go a long way to improving life for working families, but would begin to restore the belief that in a democratic society, in the United States of America, government can represent the needs of working families and not just the wealthy and the powerful. So here's a list of what has to be done in the first 100 days of the Biden administration. First, of course, we need emergency COVID economic stimulus in order to protect the millions of people who have been devastated by this pandemic. Congress must immediately pass legislation to provide $600 a week and supplemental benefits to all unemployed Americans, $2,000 a month to the working class of our country, support for small businesses, state and local governments, and guarantee health care to all until this terrible pandemic is over. We must pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. We must raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next 4 years and index it to median wage growth every year after that. Increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour will raise the wages of nearly 40 million Americans. And if we're going to expand the middle class in our country, we must make it easier for workers to join unions, engage in collective bargaining, and end the heavy-handed corporate tactics that make it hard, so hard, for workers to unionize in America. We must create millions of good-paying jobs by rebuilding America and saving our planet. And we do that by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, sidewalks, schools, water systems, and by building the millions of units of affordable housing that this country desperately needs. Further, as we lead the world in combating the existential threat of climate change, we can create millions more jobs. Congress must make massive investments in wind, solar, geothermal, electric vehicles, weatherization, and energy storage. Further, we must end the absurdity of women in America making 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. And the United States cannot continue to remain the only major nation on earth not to guarantee paid family and medical leave. We must guarantee at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. So when your kid gets sick, when you're having a baby, you don't have to rush back to work when you should not have to be there. Further, of course, as a nation, we have got to move forward to guaranteeing health care to all Americans as a human right. Congress must pass legislation to lower the eligibility age for Medicare from 65 down to 55 as we move forward to a Medicare for all single-payer system. We must provide universal coverage to all children and expand Medicare to cover dental care eyeglasses, and hearing aids. We must also greatly expand primary and mental health care by doubling funding for community health centers. Further, Congress must finally summon up the courage to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and their collusion, price fixing, and everything else that they are doing to make sure that Americans pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We have got to end that. And we have got to substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs in America. Further, in order to address our dysfunctional early childhood education system, Congress must pass legislation to provide universal pre-K for every 3 and 4-year-old in the nation and greatly expand health care. And certainly, if we are to have the best educated workforce in the world, Congress must pass legislation to make public colleges, universities, HBCUs, and trade schools tuition-free and cancel all student debt for working-class Americans. We must aggressively attack systemic racism, the failed war on drugs, and a broken criminal justice system. We must invest in jobs and education for young people in our distressed communities, not more jails and incarceration. We must also end the vicious xenophobia which now exists, restore legal status to the 1.8 million young people eligible for the DACA program, and we must move aggressively to comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship for the undocumented. Lastly, when the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, and when income and wealth inequality is worse today than any time since the 1920s, Congress must pass legislation which ensures that the wealthiest Americans start paying their fair share of taxes. A good start would be raising up to $600 billion by taxing the obscene wealth gains billionaires have made during the pandemic. So, brothers and sisters, we have got a lot of work in front of us. But if we are going to restore faith in the American political system, if we're going to ease the suffering that tens of millions of working people today are experiencing, now is the time to go forward in a bold, bold way. So I look forward to working with you in the next several months to make sure that Congress stands up for working families and has the courage to take on the powerful special interests that dominate and have dominated for years what we do legislatively and what we do economically. So thank you all very much. Let's go forward together. Thank you.